Oh, this is gonna be crazy. That was great. Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spraynpray1000's Verdict, as hosted by, you guessed it, Spraynpray1000. And basically, in case you don't know what this is basically my review series, okay? Spraynpray1000's Verdict is a review series about recently released games, and I basically give my opinions on it. I talk about what was good about a game, what I liked about it when I was making my playthrough, and what wasn't so good, and basically what could have been done better, and what are the ups and downs of a game. And, you know, basically let's just jump right into it. Today's episode is going to be on the latest installation in Visceral Games' sci-fi horror series called Dead Space 3, okay? And basically today we're gonna analyze what was good about the playthrough and what was bad about the game and what could have been better, okay? So let's jump right into it. For those of you who don't know, Dead Space is a futuristic horror game based around necromorphs, okay? Dead bodies that have become horribly, gruesomely reanimated and brought back to life that then proceed to infect other humans, other survivors, okay? And the whole premise of the game is that it's different than your average zombie game, okay? In your average zombie game, you either have very fast zombies that are, you know, their whole point of them is to get up in your face, and it's very action-packed, or you have the Resident Evil style zombies, which are very slow, but it's more horror in that kind of aspect, you know, the traditional zombie. Dead Space takes a completely different turn from that, in that the whole premises of the combat isn't based so much upon running around enemies or trying to, you know, do the Resident Evil thing of speed running through them because they're slow, or just non-stop action, okay, where you just shoot as many zombies as you can on the screen. Dead Space's main emphasis is on dismemberment, as in you can shoot the heads off of zombies, and in most zombie games that's enough to kill them and you can move on to the next one. In Dead Space, they heavily teach you that dismembering them limb by limb is a more effective strategy than just shooting them full of lead and any kind of aspect like that. And so that's kind of where the diverse aspect of the gameplay exists in the Dead Space universe. And of course, there's a whole bunch of futuristic tools that'll help you out. And for the first two games, they basically teach you that you're better off using the mining tools to dismember, you know, mining tools that are meant for cutting ores and rocks and other stuff like that, rather than like military grade weapons or anything, because military grade weapons are just going to punch holes in the enemies and they're not going to stop them. And, you know, it's basically about juggling the amount of enemies you have on screen and whatnot in an action-oriented environment. So in Dead Space 3, it basically returns more or less, for better or for worse, to the roots of the Dead Space franchise. The emphasis that they have on dismemberment in this game is still there, although it's not to the same extent as other Dead Space games, okay? Just basically to point this out, the gameplay of Dead Space 3 is a bit more action-paced. In fact, a lot more action-based than its predecessors, which were pretty much based on a good amount of action and some horror. Not just physical horror, but psychological, too. The problem with Dead Space 3 is that it kind of lost the horror. It's not scary. There's just more of an emphasis on having combat with the enemies than actually trying to strike fear into the hearts of the players, or, you know, make them scared of what could happen around the next corner. And I even said this, the game feels a lot like a game like Mass Effect or a game like Gears of War, which is kind of just more gruesome than it is horror. And for this, it also ties in with the story of Dead Space, which I'll touch on later. But at this point, the gameplay, it's not so much about, you know, survival horror. And in fact, a lot of the enemies seem to be more dumbed down, more toned down versions of the previous enemies from other games. For example, in Dead Space 1, there was an enemy, you know, that was based off of a baby, a human baby. And what happens is it's been infected by the necromorph, so it's all messed up, and it has tentacles coming out of its back, and it looks more like a frog than an actual baby. Or actually, my bad, the tentacles aren't coming out of its back. The whole body has been contorted, and the tentacles are actually umbilical cords coming out of its stomach, okay? And it's supposed to, you know, be unsettling for you to see this. It's supposed to, you know, kind of kick you in the face as to what you're used to from seeing from a game. And here you have Dead Space basically saying, well, we're going to defy all conventions, and this is what the game is going to be. It's a gruesome game, you know. We want you to be scared of every encounter. And in this game, Dead Space 2, they kind of completely tone that down. In this game, the same enemy like idea exists, but instead it's a mutated dog. It's not exactly the same as, you know, the baby, because now it's just a dog that's just looks like it's been made pale and made upright. So at the same time that, you know, the enemies really haven't changed. In fact, a lot of enemies from the first and second games both make appearances in this game, which I think is a really good homage to, you know, how the franchise has progressed. They've kind of lost what made the game, you know, horror in a sense. Back in 2008, when people were saying that this is one of the most original horror games that they've played, they kind of lost that sense. Now, moving on to what probably I should have mentioned first is the main aspect of, or the biggest change in Dead Space. This game now features co-op, okay? Cooperative gameplay, meaning that you can either play the story solo by yourself as Isaac Clarke, the main character, or you can recruit one other person to team up with and do some cooperative gameplay with. And in this case, the first player who's hosting the game will play as Isaac Clarke, and the second player will play as John Carver, basically a Marine that ties in with the story. He has his own backstory and stuff. And for me, the co-op aspect, usually I don't like co-op in horror games, but for me, this game probably does co-op in a horror game the best that I've seen in a long time, okay? But, of course, along with the good, along with the fun, in fact, I did this playthrough co-op with my friend Surgster too, and he gave his verdict during the credits of the game. And at the same time that, you know, the co-op really adds to the gameplay. It makes it more interesting when two people are fighting the necromorphs. You have someone to watch your back, and basically you can relax with your friend. Well, not really relax, but you can fight with your friends and stop the threat together. At the same time, there's also problems. There's snags with that, and I'll explain. First of all, the second player, John Carver, really at some points feels like a very essential part of the game, a very essential part of the story. Like he needs to be there for it to make any kind of sense. And on the other hand, John Carver at some points, especially in some cutscenes that are, you know, centered or, you know, made to progress the game from one area to another, he just kind of, you know, he's just there to be there. Like, he'll make a 2-second cameo in the actual cutscene, and then the cutscene will go back to focusing solely on Isaac. Which, to me, I know why they did that, because the game was basically built around Isaac, around the single-player experience. And John Carver actually does appear in the single-player game, not to the same degree as the co-op game, obviously, but basically he appears there, and he's there, he interacts with you. But there's just some times when I feel like, you know, Carver's just not featured prominently enough in the story. His character is just almost ignored or forgotten about in some scenes where he really could have had a say. But on the other hand, I found that this is one thing I found out while we're still on the topic of gameplay. There's apparently, I don't know what is up with the game, but there is a problem when enemies are targeting two players at once, that they will automatically default and run after Isaac or whoever's player 1 and almost completely ignore player 2 to some extent. For example, there were several points during the playthrough when Sergio and I were both double teaming enemies and we were both doing our thing, and I would see enemies that he was shooting completely ignore him, ignore the fact that he was shooting them in the face, and come for me. Just because, and I'm not even shooting them, I'm all fighting other enemies, you know? So it's kind of an unfair advantage that, you know, the enemies that are so much closer to Sergio, that are your co-op player, would ignore the co-op player, player 2, and go after player 1. That is just, in my book, that is very, very weird and very, very fishy, and I smell not so equal balancing in the game there, but I can't prove it. Well, I know the phenomenon does happen, so. On top of that, this game has a lot of bugs. And I mean, this is just me speaking from week 1. So if you're listening to this in the future, they might have fixed them. But for week 1, when this game gets launched, okay, this game has console freezing, bad server connections. The servers drop randomly for no reason. It has tons and tons of glitches, stuff happening that obviously is not supposed to happen. Monsters getting stuck on invisible boundaries, and you know, you're getting stuck like placing down stuff. At one point I was placing down my scavenger bot, which is a robot that collects supplies for you, that helps you build stuff. And it just basically, I was stuck in that animation for like 15 to 20 seconds, and I could not move. I could not do anything because the game hadn't properly finished the animation. There was another point where we were doing side quests, and the whole game would basically freeze, and it happened to us twice, actually, that I can remember. At one point, we needed to put a battery in a doorway so we could open the door, and we put the battery in one of the slots to open an optional door so we could get the items from within. And when we, you know, ran back out to try and remove the battery was locked in place and we could not move it, okay? And for me, that is just almost unacceptable because we would have had to quit the game and restart for it to register properly. And thankfully, the glitch did work itself out. It did eventually open the other door. I'm not sure if that was supposed to happen because there was another slot closer to that door that a battery could have fit into. So I'm not sure about the whole details about it, but the door did open, so we didn't have to restart. And at another point during a side quest, especially one that was very important to the story behind John Carver, we beat the sequence. We died a couple times on it, and then we beat it. We beat it very quickly, and apparently the game did not register properly that the sequence was beaten because it was supposed to have dialogue prior to you beating it. And I guess they didn't anticipate you beating it so quickly, and we did beat it so quickly that the game froze for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and we were stuck in that room. And I was saying I'm gonna have to commit suicide so we can do this again, and hopefully it won't bug out on us. And according to Sergio, I am inclined to believe his theory because again, those sequences are only for Carver; they're not Isaac. I'm inclined to believe him because apparently there's supposed to be dialogue that's happening between Carver and, you know, someone else very important to him during the story. And that dialogue is supposed to happen during the actual fight. But because Surgster knew what to do, he beat it before the dialogue could finish. And I'm not sure if that created problems with the actual dialogue. But in any event, we were stuck there for a good couple of minutes. And it was just, you know, there's no... Like, what most games do is, in a sequence like that, is they only let you damage what progresses the game. Like, there was an object you had to destroy to, you know, complete that sequence. They would let you damage it so much, and then they would let the game talk, and then they would let you damage it so much, and then the game would talk again, and then you would basically finish it off, and that would be it. Apparently, that sequence is only designed that they keep talking, and you can damage it the entire time, and there's, like, no markers or something that check how much damage you've done and prevent you from damaging it more so the story can progress. So I don't know what to say much about that. Now, getting off of some of the bad stuff, let's talk about what was really good about this game. Okay, let me take a drink while I do. One of the things that I really liked about this game was the side missions, okay? The side missions in Dead Space. Now, before, Dead Space has been basically pretty much a linear series of games, okay? You had Dead Space 1, 2, which were basically completely linear. There was that Extraction game, which was a rail shooter, so obviously it's linear as hell. Dead Space 3 decided to revamp that idea of linearity by adding optional side quests that are in the game that you can do and you can complete for rewards, for components, for new weapons, for a whole bunch of stuff, med kits, ammo, everything. You can complete them, and they're actually not just like the generic side quest of go here, kill so many of this, and then you leave. They actually kind of tie into the story a bit, and they, you know, give some more. They flesh out a lot of the background between some of the characters you meet. In fact, there's a whole series of co-op missions designed around John Carver, which explains his backstory and why he is how he is, and basically evolves him almost as a character. And I said that is very good. That is very good. That is probably one of my favorite parts of the game. There are some really good co-op missions, and if you understand how, you know, the whole Dead Space universe works with, you know, the dementia that the characters are experiencing, and the hallucinations and the monstrosities and their past, and how all that gets intertwined, especially for Carver because he's a newcomer to this series. Those 2 missions that Carver had were my favorite, and I wasn't even playing as Carver, so I didn't even get the full experience. So not only do they give you incentive to play the game in co-op, because if you don't have Carver with you, if you're not in a 2-player game, you can't play that. So not only are they giving you incentive to play the game in co-op, they're also giving you incentive to play the game more than once, you as Carver. So I just think that is just great. They've tried to really diversify the formula. I'm liking that now games nowadays are trying to re-diversify some age-old formulas, and this is definitely an example of that I liked. Another thing that I also liked, at first that I was kind of skeptical about, was the weapon system. In previous Dead Space games, you could carry up to 4 weapons on Isaac, and now in this game, you can only carry 2 slots of weapons, okay? But here's the catch. The weapons, instead of weapons having a primary fire and an alternate fire, weapons now have, you mix and match guns together. So for example, you can have an assault rifle on top of as your primary weapon, and then underneath you could put a plasma cutter for dismembering. So in this game, not only do you fight necromorphs, which you're supposed to dismember, as well as humans, which you can either dismember and or pump full of lead, you have a choice now between what guns you want to take, and all the guns from previous Dead Space games are in there. They're there, so there's a whole lot of customization to make. You can make different variations of guns. There's new guns that have never been seen before, and I like that gun system. I opened up to it after a while. I said, this is pretty good, although there are some overpowered combinations. For example, there was a shotgun that I had. It was actually DLC shot, a GameStop reservation shotgun. But I'm pretty sure that if you upgrade the basic shotgun, it would basically do the same thing. I upgraded that shotgun, and that shotgun basically carried me through the whole game. It was so good. And the weird thing about it is, the farther away I was from my target, the more damage it did to my target. In fact, I would be one-shotting more advanced enemies with the farther away I was. And instead of point blank, you would think point blank, there's no way all the buckshot could miss. The buckshot was actually missing at point blank, and it was just almost not worth it to shoot them at point blank. So there's a lot of interesting combinations you can make. You can also make your own blueprints and share them with your friend. You save your configuration of weapons, and there's just a whole lot of customization to make. And I just think that was a really good idea. Now let's talk about what I didn't like about the item system, okay? The item system in this game has been revamped to not include money, okay? In previous Dead Space games, you use credits to buy weapons, you use credits to buy ammo and med kits, and basically your supplies, in addition to finding them around the field. Now in Dead Space, they took out the money option, and they replaced it with resources. And basically, if you play a game like StarCraft, you play any kind of game like World of Warcraft, or anything that, uses resources to build and create your weapons, you're going to be pretty familiar with this concept, okay? The concept is that you're playing as, well, you're going to scavenge all these different things. So like, for example, for med kits, there's a gel that you need to find. For weapons and ammo, you need to find scrap metal, semiconductors, tungsten, all these different various, like, not minerals, but, resources and whatnot that can be used to then be made into weapons and ammo and everything. And so, it makes it survival horror that, you have to find this stuff. But at the same time, the horror aspect has been diminished because the game isn't that scary anymore. I didn't like it at some points because there were parts where I was just overflowing on resources that then I could not transmute or, sell off to get other resources of. So at some points, you're just completely lacking certain resources and you don't acquire them at a decent rate. On the other hand, you have instances where now the suit system is different. So now suits really don't matter. Suits are more of a customizable thing, just aesthetically pleasing, which in a way is pretty good. But there's no more bonuses for wearing suits, okay? Which I didn't like that so much. I thought that kind of, defeated the purpose of having changeable suits other than just like costumes. Excuse me. Additionally, I did not like the fact that the ammo, well, the ammo is now universal in this game, which I think is pretty good. but there were just some parts where the ammo stacks are too small, and I just felt that it would have been a bit better, you know, if ammo, because again, we were playing on normal, so obviously it's easy as hell when two players are combining their forces on normal, but I just don't even want to begin to jump into some of the harder difficulties with setups like this, because I said, you know, Dead Space 1 and 2 are hard enough on their own, and now you have stuff like this coming into play. It just to me feels very awkward that they would choose that sort of route, but it's not that bad. Of course, also with the resource collection comes the fact that EA decides to make money off of that. So in a way, I want to bash them for making resource scavenger bots, which basically are bots that you deploy and then they come back 10 minutes later with a good amount of resources. You can pay to make them better, okay? And on day one, that's just the kind of shit that leaves a bad taste in my mouth, okay? And I hate it when they kind of do that stuff. But at the same time, you can also find items in game that are rare as hell, but you can find them. They let you buy these things actually. Well, they let you buy resource packs by playing the game. So they're good guys. They understand that not everyone's gonna fork over $5 after buying a game and then, you know, pay more for the game. But, and regardless of that, the gameplay itself is pretty solid. It's kind of what you came to expect from Dead Space, except toned down a bit more. I'm not sure why they toned down the horror. You know, besides the fact that, you know, the co-op is kind of there. You can have co-op games that are still horror, though. That's the thing, though. So, for me, I still am unsure why they toned down the horror. I haven't, you know, researched it, but just from playing it, you know, if they were willing to push the envelope that much, for them to kind of double back on it now just is very weird in my opinion. But anyway, I know I'm forgetting one or two key points, but I gotta keep this moving. On top of that, the story of Dead Space 3, okay? The story of Dead Space 3, without getting into too much spoilers, takes place several months after the end of Dead Space 2. A lot of the characters from Dead Space 2, actually, well, one key character returns other than Isaac Clarke, and that's maybe mainly the driving impetus behind the game. And you basically spend the game trying to figure out how to stop the necromorph threat once and for all, because now all of humanity is in danger. And so this is kind of the story that I was going to expect from Dead Space, but the problem with the story is that it feels like the set pieces are there, okay, and you know what's coming, you expect it, there's no real twists to be had in the story, okay? Unlike Dead Space 1 and 2, which had a lot of twists, well, there is a couple key twists that I won't spoil because they're obviously major, but they're there, but there's just not as many. There's a lot of points in the game where I said, oh, I know this character's going to die because he or she is doing X, Y, Z, or oh, I wonder what's going on. And it's just like, you know, you can kind of see the set pieces falling into each other. And in fact, the story feels very much like the end of, like, to name another EA franchise, another game like Mass Effect 3. The story feels like a very ultimatum-driven story where you have to do this, that everything is resting in the balance, and it almost basically, for the most part, follows the same rhythmic pattern, okay? And I'm not saying that's detrimental, it's just, you know, considering the taste that games have had. There's been 2 games in the past year that have done this. 2 major franchises. Assassin's Creed had a very game that has left a Mass Effect style taste in my mouth, and it's just, I don't like that kind of ending in some ways. It was alright for Dead Space. I think the ending was satisfactory. People are going to enjoy it. There's cliffhangers too, and also, if you played Dead Space 1, there's an Easter egg hidden in there, and when you start playing the game, you'll know what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil it on the video, on the verdict, because I want to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. But if you played Dead Space 1, you'll notice the Easter egg if you really got into Dead Space 1. So it's there. It's definitely there. So, other than that, you know, other minor stuff, such as the soundtrack is pretty much very good, because I always like talking about soundtrack, because the music of any game is really what can set the mood, and I think that Dead Space's music sets the mood. Again, the horror aspect is diminished, but it does set the mood for an action-packed survival game. Is it deserving of horror? I don't know. That's, you know, that might need to be debated further, but it does definitely set the mood. You can definitely get into it. I do like the setting of the game. I do think that the setting is very interesting, and at the same time, let me just get this out the way really quickly, because you know I don't like talking about graphics. The graphics are okay. They're basically similar to Dead Space 1. They're good, and that's all I'm going to say about graphics, because I'm not a graphics-driven person. I think that should be the smallest part of a game. Ironically, though, it becomes the most important part when the mainstream media reviews. So, now that I know last review I did was Devil May Cry DMC Reboot. So, I'm basically ready to hand down my verdict on this game. I would say that Dead Space 1 was pretty good. I'd give it like an 86. I mean, not an 86. Whoops, that would be what I would give not Dead Space. I would give that to Resident Evil, whatever the hell I just played. Resident Evil. What am I even saying? Not Resident Evil. What was that other survival horror game I just played a few weeks ago? Oh, I didn't record that. Never mind. Whoops. I would give Dead Space 1 more like an 85-ish, okay? And Dead Space 2 I would give more like an 89. Dead Space 3, now, all the negatives about the game aside, I think that definitely the main meat of this game is playing it with a friend that, you know, you're going to have a good time playing. You're both into it. Especially what really enhanced it for me, and I know that Surger said a lot of this, is the fact that Surger read the books about Dead Space. So he was able to give me some insight that I would have normally never gotten, because I don't read the books for games, okay? I believe that a game should stand on its own 2 feet, and, you know, that was originally my strictest stance, and that's typically how I, you know, review games. That's how I'm going to review this game. But if I had to say that, you know, biasing my opinion, which is something I won't do, and because Surger always makes games so much fun to play through, that if I were to, you know, just playing through with Surger, or playing it through with a friend that you really enjoy, I would give Dead Space 3 an 88, okay? Because it's really fun when you play it with a friend. There's a lot of cool stuff to be had. There's reasons to play the game through multiple times, you know, because Dead Space does do New Game Plus very well. I do like that very much about the Dead Space franchise. They always seem to know what they're doing with the New Game Plus. And on top of that, just, you know, playing it with a friend is a blast, okay? Playing co-op in a survival horror game is usually very fun, because it's always, something always happens, and, you know, so we turn some of the glitches into being hilarious. But holistically, I gotta look at the whole package. I gotta put aside my, my you know, prejudice towards having fun with Surger, because having fun with Sergio and any of my friends is just always gonna, you know, take precedence over gaming. But I gotta look at the game professionally, and I have to sit down and I have to say that Dead Space 3, for the most part, it's good. It's longer than the previous 2 Dead Space games, and I'm going to give it an 86, okay? Not too much less than co-op, but I'm going to hand down my verdict and give Dead Space 3 an 86. It's worth checking out, and if you're a Dead Space fan, basically you're going to want to sit down and play it. You probably already bought it anyway. It's definitely, you know, you're going to miss the horror aspect, but the basics of the game are still there. You still have your basic stuff that made Dead Space original. Your time-slowing kinesis, your time-slowing stasis, your kinesis. A lot of the backstory of the Dead Space universe is going to be revealed, and you're just going to have fun, because, you know, assuming that you had fun with the other Dead Space games, it's going to be interesting to see how all this ties in together. And I just have to say that I'm very happy I played this game. It was very interesting. I recommend it to anyone who wants a good action game to play with your friends. Not so much a co-op, a survival horror game. You might want to lay off on that, because they kind of ditched that aspect. And an 86 pretty much justifies all around that it's a good game. It's not, you know, amazing. It's not, I'm going to piss my pants, this game is Game of the Year material, you know, but it's still a good game that I'm going to remember now, a couple months from now, and say, you know, when I'm making my decision about what games were really good this year that I really enjoyed, this game is going to be up there, and I'm going to say I enjoyed it, you know, in the same way that I enjoyed the Devil May Cry reboot, although I didn't give it as high of a score because of other stuff along those lines. A lot of this game's faults rest upon the fact that it feels like it's not fully tested on one end and not fully completed and fully well-rounded for all the different characters. So, in a way, it is a good ending to the franchise. Well, not to the franchise. Oh no, this franchise is published by EA. Nuh-uh, it's not over yet. But in a way, it is very good. It's a very solid package. I enjoyed playing it, and I guess that's all I have to say about Dead Space 3. And this week we also have another horror game coming up, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching the verdict, and I will see you at the next playthrough. So, this is Spraynpray1000 signing off, and I will see you guys later. Stay golden.
Be seeing ya.
Smell you later, Gramps.
Malcolm! Malcolm!
What?
Come over here!
What?
Look at the wall.
Yo, look at this. I'm not even sure what I'm seeing. Okay. What?
I'm juggling him.
Yo, oh, you killed him. Yo, they start spinning and everything. Ah, what are you doing, Sergio? You killed him. You got him killed.